All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you all so much for joining us today. Very excited to have the opportunity to share this information with you. I know that it's hard some days to, still thinking about pandemic and everything else that's going on, but there are still a lot of things from an HR perspective that we do need to keep at the forefront of our mind. And most importantly, some of what we're going to share with you today is not only what you need to be doing today in light of what's happened over the last few months, but also thinking about what are your next steps? What are the things from an HR perspective that you need to do to prepare your company? And so we're going to take some time today to walk you through that. We are wide open to questions, so please do not hesitate to throw your questions into the chat section. We'll make sure to take part in those conversations as we go. Don't feel like you need to hold those to the end. I'm more than happy to stop and take questions as we go along. So first and foremost, a little bit about myself and my background. People Solutions Center is an HR consulting firm here in the St. Louis market. We've been in business for 4.5 years, helping mostly small to mid-sized companies, big enough to have HR needs and have people issues, but small enough that they don't necessarily need full-time HR in their organization. And so I've built an organization that allows us to take my 20+ years of experience, plus all the experience of the consultants on my team to really support our clients in this space, and everything from HR to recruiting to employee relations, you name it, we've covered it at some point in our career, and do a great job of trying to bring that information to your company. With that in mind, one of the things that we know for sure over the last 3 months is that our clients feel like they've been drinking HR through a fire hose on a daily basis. And so we've really compiled up-to-date information on what folks need to pay attention to and think about as it relates to HR, particularly in light of COVID-19. There's 4 really big areas we're going to spend time talking about today to help you stay on top of this, and also just think about how do I put myself in my employees' mindset, and what are the things that I need to have on my radar. Most importantly, and I think this is really key, in addition to thinking about what do you do because we're still sort of dealing with the current pandemic issues, it is absolutely imperative that we think about the contingency plans and the pivots we might need to take should stay-at-home orders come back. And here's one of the biggest reasons why. Employees completely understood when we were caught flat-footed as an employer 3 months ago, nobody in their right mind could have anticipated what would happen, and suddenly we would all be stuck with stay-at-home orders. On the flip side, now that we've been through it once, employees will have an expectation that, hey, you had a chance to figure out what worked and didn't work before and get prepared. In addition, we've all been hearing things through media and so forth that this is it is a possibility that stay-at-home orders could come back and so forth. So if we're once again not prepared for it, we're going to end up looking to our employees like we just didn't take the time to care about it. And more importantly, we didn't take time to care about them. So some of what we're going to talk about today is not just what do you need to be worried about because of what happened in the past, but more importantly, how do you take what we learned and think about what would you do going forward so that you have a contingency plan, regardless of whether it's COVID-19 or some other contingency plan that we haven't even thought of yet. What are the things that we learned and how do we leverage them going forward? We're going to focus on 4 really big areas today. First, we're going to start talking about some of the legal pieces that you need to think about and make sure that you know. One of the things that we are learning as we're starting to work with clients for the first time is things that we take for granted because they were laws that were passed in March and April and now have become just common knowledge to us as HR professionals may be very new to the average business owner. And so we're going to talk to you today, at least at a high level, to make sure that you're aware of what laws you need to be familiar with. We're then going to shift and talk about communication, because the one thing that we have learned from our employees' feedback over the last several months is employers who got communication right, employers who said, I don't know the answers, but I'm going to keep telling you as much as I know, really have made a difference. And they've built a loyalty with their employees that will last a lifetime. So it's really important that we keep going on that and that we don't lose our momentum. We're going to route back. A lot of companies are still doing work from home. And so you've probably got some things figured out. But now that we've been doing it for longer and employees are potentially even hearing, we're announcing in many companies, this is going to happen. This is going to be the way the world is working for you from work from home until 2021 at least. Now we have to start shifting and making some additional adjustments. And that means we've got to do more than ever to make sure we keep our employees engaged. Because while it does sound like an unemployment rate of over 14% is, everybody's out looking for a job, it would be easy to replace people. The reality of it is most of our employers who are trying to hire new folks are actually struggling to find the right talent for a lot of varieties of reasons. So you want to keep the great people you have so you don't ever have to go out and hire folks to replace them. You just want to be growing, hopefully, and adding to your team for those purposes. So let's jump right in and start talking about some of these legal considerations. Again, I'm going to start this conversation at a really high level. And if you're not familiar with this information, let us know either through chat. I can dive a little deeper, or I also have separate webinars that are just on this particular topic that we would be happy to share with you. One of the most interesting parts of everything that came out of COVID-19 from an HR perspective is, for the first time in a really long time, first of all, there was new employment law. Secondly, not only was there new employment law, but it actually applied more to small business than it did to large businesses. And that's a rather unique experience in our space in this country. So that in and of itself was really important to know. But also, it passed lightning fast. This thing was like beginning and end done in about 2 weeks, which is very unusual in the space of HR law. HR law tends to take years and years, and it's been vetted, and we all have a general idea of what it's going to say before it comes out. And in this case, we had literally watching Congress, and then you had about 24 hours from about the time that you thought it might pass to it's been signed, and now you have to figure it out. So there's a couple of key things that we want to make sure that all employers are aware of under what is referred to now as the FFCRA, which is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. First and foremost, know that this, again, applies mostly to small businesses. And there's a myth out there that, oh, I have less than 50 employees, so FFCRA does not apply to me. That is actually not an accurate statement. There is a part of FFCRA that may not apply to you if you have less than 50 employees, and that's this emergency family medical leave piece. But the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act applies to you even if you're less than 500 employees, then the emergency paid sick leave is going to apply to you. So it really does not, we need to make sure that you kind of erase that thought pattern from your head, make sure that you know what that is. At a high level, the Emergency Family Medical Leave Act was really designed to cover individuals that, because of lack of daycare or lack of schools, could not work. It mostly applied in industries where work from home was not a possibility. We really thought that when school was done, this might resolve itself, but in reality, some employers are still have employees who are covered under this eFMLA because daycares and camps have not reopened. I will say in the St. Louis market, most camps and daycares are either reopened or summer camps are starting to reopen over the next few weeks. And so the issues around this should be diminishing a bit. We're still, though, uncertain as to what this is going to mean from a school perspective and how, particularly in certain counties, how they're going to handle the reentry from a school perspective. So you still may have individuals who are eligible for eFMLA through the end of the year, which is when the FFCRA will expire. The Emergency Family Medical Leave essentially says people get 12 weeks of paid leave of absence if their child cannot return to school or daycare due to closings. The second piece of this is the emergency paid sick leave, and this is for a variety of situations where individuals are either exposed or they're actually sick or they're caring for another person. It provides for essentially the equivalent of 2 weeks of paid sick leave time that employers are required to give to their employees. There are on the upside, so if this is all new to you, you definitely want to dive in because you likely have somebody who, I think most of our clients have had at least one person that we've needed to research along the way, whether or not they were eligible for this emergency paid sick leave. If you do end up paying somebody the paid sick leave, there are tax credits that are available for you. So it does offset it, but you need to make sure you apply it right so that you're eligible for the tax credits. So again, we don't want to spend a ton of time on the legal piece because we have a lot of resources available to us on this, but I do want to make sure at this stage of the game, employers haven't overlooked this and certainly know that it is in place through the end of the year, regardless of what your stay-at-home orders say. The second piece of the legal piece is, so what do you do now? You've made these adjustments, you understand the new law. What else do you need to worry about from a legal perspective? And that's really all about updating your employee handbook. First of all, if you went into this without an employee handbook, you really need to make sure you have an employee handbook going forward. Individuals that we picked up as new clients through all of this, when they were in a much worse spot when they didn't have original sets of policies and outlined and communicated to lean on as to what they would do even in the broadest of situations. And then there was added confusion because they had new situations to deal with that they really didn't have any frame of reference to. So it's really important that you have a handbook to start. And if you have a handbook, you need to do some updates to it. We are recommending that folks put an appendix into their employee handbook that is all things COVID. And it really is intended because things like FFCRA only apply through the end of December. So there's no reason to update your entire handbook, but to put this appendix in there matters. Some of the things that you want to look at beyond FFCRA, paid time off policies. This one is really important because many companies have paid time off policies that say, if you don't use your time before the end of the year, you're going to lose it. Well, employees, most of us ended up canceling a spring break, probably canceling a summer vacation, and people are going to get to the end of the year and have huge banks of time available that they're either going to have to rush to take before the end of the year, or that they're going to be wanting to carry over because after we've been home for a few more months, we're all going to want that vacation somewhere outside of our four walls. So it's really important now that employers start thinking about what do we want to do for this year and what policy changes do I want to consider. We've had some employers who are saying, you know what, this year and this year only, we're going to let you roll all of it over to 2021. I have other clients who have said, you know what, we want to make sure you take it between now and then, and you need to take at least 3 days every month. We have other employers who have come up with alternatives. There's a lot of different options you can do around this, but you want to make sure that you've communicated with your employees and that you're ahead of the game so that you don't end up at the end of the year being super busy again and then have everybody wanting to take their time off or having everybody upset that they're losing time that they had earned. If you have not yet put your employee screening procedures in place, you definitely need to make sure that you've got a process in place for this. This is, especially in St. Louis County and St. Louis City, these are requirements. These are not optional. And those screening procedures need to be outlined in your employee handbook, and you need to make sure you have the documentation to show that you're following through on those. That's going to be what helps you in the event that an employee gets sick. And those procedures include daily temperature checks, documentation that you're checking those temperatures. There's a form that clients need to have each employee fill out on a daily basis saying that they're not experiencing symptoms of COVID. And there's a policy, and most importantly, you want this in your pieces, a social distancing policy for when people are not at work. So for example, the Lake of the Ozarks example that happened Memorial Day weekend, I looked at my husband on Sunday and said, after the video went out about the lake, and I said, what do you want to guess that by Tuesday morning, the first call I have is from a client saying, I have an employee in that photo, what do I do? It didn't even make it till Tuesday morning. By Monday night at 7 o'clock, I had my first text from a client saying, I just found out one of my employees was in that pool. What do I do and what are my options? You do have the option as an employer to create a policy that says to your employees, look, our expectation is that you are following the social distancing guidelines, not only of your municipality or your wherever you live, but also where you work. And so if you live in St. Charles County, but you work in St. Louis County, you are absolutely, it is a fair game for an employer to say, you must follow the St. Louis County guidelines, which are more stringent than the St. Charles County guidelines, to ensure the safety of your employees. It's not even just optional, it's actually a requirement, because you are bringing groups of people together, and it's your job as the employer to make sure that they're safe and that make sure that anybody coming into your space is safe as well. So we continue to tell folks, even as we open up and people are getting more comfortable being out and being comfortable doing things, really incumbent on an employer to still say there are guidelines in place at the municipality and the county level, and we need to follow them and make sure that they're reinforced. All of that being an independence in your handbook will be a great support for you as you move forward and you get questions, but more importantly, it sends a message to your employees. We have employees that run the gamut in terms of how concerned they are about returning to work. And when you put this handbook together, it sends a great message to say, regardless of where you are at in your comfort level, we're doing what we need to as an employer to make sure, A, you're all safe, and B, that everybody feels comfortable and included in the environment. So once we get past the legal piece, communication becomes really important through all of this. You cannot over-communicate in the state that things are in today. And there's a couple of things that we need to think about when we're communicating, especially because we are staying at home. If you have not yet put in place options to allow people to keep connected on a regular basis, this is the time to start that, particularly if you're staying home for a long period of time. But even if you bring people back into the office, we still have opportunities to have group meetings, but not all be sitting in the room together. So leverage technology. Even if everybody's in the office, you may still do a Zoom call if 10 of you need to have a conversation, because 10 of you are not allowed to all be in the same conference room. So using Zoom, understanding things like Zoom and GoToMeeting so that you can use polling options, so you can use breakout rooms. We have all sorts of clients that are continuing forward with virtual training, sessions as large as 40 people. Don't put development of your people on hold simply because it feels like, well, we can't all get together in a training room. Instead, figure out what are the options for doing these sessions, but doing them virtually, and find ways to make them really engaging and exciting for folks. Even if you didn't have regular team meetings before, now more than ever, we need to be having these. So team members want to know what's happening. If they've been working from home and they've never done that before, they likely feel really siloed right now. And so regular team meetings are a good way to break up those silos and ensure that folks are communicating across the organization. At the same time, if you haven't already figured out what it's like when you're working from home and everybody is on Zoom calls, we get really forgetful about the fact that we used to just walk down the hallway and say, hey, by the way, what happened with that conversation with Joe yesterday? Keep your conversations spontaneous and make sure to pick up the phone randomly, ask people how they're doing. Communication isn't just about getting the work done. It's really about checking in and seeing how people are feeling. We're no longer in a situation where the only thing people are dealing with is the pandemic. People are also dealing with a whole lot of other things going on in their lives, and you need to connect with people. And we'll talk about that more when we get to engagement. A couple of key things to make sure about communication. People have a lot of questions. They had tons of questions as we went through this. And owners and leadership teams that did a really good job of tracking all of the questions they got and what answers did they give people will be key long-term for two reasons. One, if you forgot to get back to somebody on a question, they might still be stewing about it. So you need to circle back. But more importantly, that contingency plan that I talked about for going forward, we might need that. So if you already have what were the questions we had and what did we tell people before, you're going to make your life easier if suddenly we have to make another pivot. And that other pivot could look a whole lot of different ways even than what we just did. But understanding what people were worried about before gives you a great direction to think about. Even if that was the answer I gave then, should we relook at it? Because do I know more now? I guarantee you, decisions you made in the first week of stay-at-home orders might not have been the exact decision you would make now that you're a few weeks out, a few months out, and you have a better understanding of what was about to happen. So go back and look at those answers. Rule of thumb in communication from a leadership perspective: share what you know when you know it. When we're going through crisis, people realize you may not have all the answers, and that's okay. But being afraid to even have the conversation is a really big challenge. So sometimes it's okay to say to an employee, hey, I know you might be worried about whether or not this position is going to still be here. I know you might be worried about how we're going to handle the fact that Susie gets sick at the office. I don't know that answer yet, but it's on my radar. And more importantly, I'll let you know when I know. Those are the kinds of things that are most important in terms of making sure that people feel cared about. And that's what's going to give you that loyalty and engagement. One of the things that we know for sure, right now, individuals that are currently employed aren't out looking for other jobs. Our clients that are growing and trying to recruit would be the first ones to tell you that. But part of the reason that they're not looking isn't because maybe they're not, because they're so happy they want to stay, but because they're a little afraid to jump right now. That being said, there will be a moment in the future, whether that future is August or January, doesn't matter. But there will be a moment in the future when individuals from an organization will step back and say, you know what? I now feel comfortable enough to start thinking about whether or not this is where I want to expend my energy and my passion for what I do. How did my owner, how did my company handle this pandemic situation? Did I feel cared for? Did I feel like my opinions mattered? Did I feel like somebody was telling me what the heck I was supposed to do? Were they flexible? Did they help me through this? If the answer to that is yes, these folks aren't going anywhere. And in fact, they're probably going to be more passionate and more engaged than ever. If the answer to that is no, you will have a significant retention issue come 2021, 2022. You don't want to be in that position. And so you really need to be on the front end of things. So work from home. Let's talk a little bit. We've been doing it for quite some time, but there's some do's and don'ts that you want to think about here. First of all, make sure you've got policies and you've updated your existing policies. We all kind of did it in an emergency situation a few months ago. We now need to actually think about how long will we be doing this? If work from home is going to extend for you even through the summer and definitely through the end of the year, you need to start looping back and figuring out what is everybody doing from a schedules perspective, and is everybody on the same page? You need to look at what was your work from home policy in your employee handbook. Many of us have employee handbooks that say you can telecommute, but only if you're not doing any kind of dependent care with other, like children or elder parents at home. Well, guess what? That's kind of was blown out of the window, like all over the place in the spring. And depending on what your schools do, it may be out the window in the fall as well. And so we really need to stop and think about what are we going to make those stay-at-home policies look like. Make sure people are set up with the technology that makes this as easy as possible. Be really, really smart about how you make that happen. But the other piece, and this is one that I have continued to remind people to do, make sure people are actually sitting in good office equipment or at least comfortable chairs. When we all had to go home at the drop of a hat, we all sat at our dining room tables, we sat on our couches, and it was fun for a little bit. But we are more and more seeing that individuals that are sitting in that bad dining room chair are going to start having back issues if they do it for much longer, and you're going to end up with a workers' comp claim. So be sure to check in with folks, and if they're staying at home for longer than, honestly, if anybody's not back to work already, you need to be checking in and finding out what is their work office setup and how to make that work. Make sure you've looked at your job descriptions as well. Again, especially if this is going for you, work from home is in place through the end of the year. Figure out what part of this person's job can't they do from home, and how are you adjusting their job description appropriately. Simply ignoring it and not updating it actually will put you behind the 8 ball in the long run. And so it's time to look at this and figure out what's going really well in this role. What are the things that when you thought this was going to be for 6 weeks, you said, don't worry about it. And now going forward, what will that mean in terms of people's performance expectations? I apologize, I hit the wrong button there. When you're working from home, there are 4 key critical pieces that you have to do better than you've ever done them before. When your team is spread out, it takes a little extra planning and a little extra effort to do these 4 things. And it's communicate, engage, keep people focused, and most importantly, support people. This isn't just in work from home, but it's COVID, like it's everything that's going on in our world. It's COVID, it's media, it's all of the things that are happening in terms of race relations today. From beginning to end, people just have so much coming at them. And our job as good leaders is to make sure that people feel like they know what the heck is going on. They're engaged because somebody, like they matter in the organization and they're doing important work. They're focused because they know what they should be doing and they know what they do matters. And most important, they feel supported, both emotionally, physically, and just that their voice is heard at the table on a regular basis. So let's talk about engagement and what that can look like. Here's a couple of things that you can do to make sure that with engaged employees, you are keeping that focus and that engagement with people. First of all, focus comes all down to job descriptions. I will tell you, so many clients, when we first start working with them, I ask them, can you show me your job descriptions? And their job descriptions either have so many cobwebs on them that they're like, have to blow it off to get rid of the dust, or they've never existed in the first place. Now more than ever, as people are struggling with all of these competing things going on while they're working from home, or they're split shifts working from home sometimes and not others, making sure that their job descriptions are accurate is really important. Getting focused on weekly one-on-ones so that you're checking in with people regularly. I might be in a great place mentally this week, but by next week, something new has happened in the world, and now I'm struggling to stay focused and engaged. And so coaching sessions and weekly one-on-ones help us set weekly priorities. They help us set deadlines. And for most folks, deadlines make all the difference of knowing what am I even doing today and where am I spending my time. It helps the organization move forward. And quite honestly, it's interesting, as we went through this, folks wanted to give people a safe space to say, I know it's hard right now, don't worry about it. There's a really fine balance. That is the right thing to do in certain moments. But if you do that for too long and you stop holding people accountable, they start feeling like, well, maybe what I do doesn't matter anyway. So if they're okay with the fact that I'm not doing much, maybe I'm okay with the fact that I'm not doing much. And somebody can actually snowball into a really bad place that way. So while we want to be compassionate, we want to be empathetic, that does not mean don't hold people accountable. The other reason you want to make sure you hold people accountable is if it were for 2 or 3 weeks and you're like, oh, you had a little 2 or 3 week spell where it didn't go well, that's not going to come back to haunt somebody at the end of the year when it comes to performance conversations. But now this is lasting more than 2 to 3 weeks. And if we now it's a big enough chunk of time that we as leaders are going to look back at how people performed and be like, yeah, they didn't do as well during all of that. They weren't very focused, and it's going to have an impact on their coaching conversations in the long run. There's nothing worse for an employee than having you ignore it during this because you're being compassionate and empathetic, only to hear the feedback at the end of the year of, it really felt like you kind of checked out and I would have liked to see you step up a little bit faster. So if you're having that issue with an employee, now is the time to have the coaching conversation. You can still do that with compassion and empathy, but you need to do the right thing. Most importantly, making sure people are engaged. This takes a little extra effort these days because people are quite frankly worn out, and they're even more worn out from Zoom calls. So making sure you're finding ways to make it fun. Use your employees, have them volunteer to be part of an engage and connect team, and find ways for people to do fun things, especially if they're virtual. There's all sorts of ways to make that happen. even socially distancing, you can do all sorts of fun things virtually. I worked for an organization, the team that I led at Progressive before I started my business, the team that I led was 100% virtual. And we used to play a virtual bingo game every winter time. I'm not a huge fan of like, let's play games, but I will tell you, it was the favorite thing that we did from beginning to end. Everyone on our team loved Snowy Bingo. And it was easy and it was cheap, and yet it got everybody engaged in something fun. One of the other fun activities I've heard during all of this that people have been doing, so doing like a COVID-19 treasure hunt. You get everybody on the call, you put up a list of the things they have to run around their house and find, and everybody comes back, and whoever has the most items off the list, and everybody shares. Find ways to break it up. Find ways for people to share what their experience is. What's really interesting about COVID-19 and the stay-at-home orders is it is the first time for many of us in history that we have a single shared experience that impacted you personally, regardless of what else was going on in your world. And it had a slightly different impact on everyone, but everyone will have a story of what did you do during COVID? And so take advantage of that and make it an opportunity for people to share and connect and grow together. One of the really great recommendations in terms of ways to engage is starting your one-on-ones and or your team meetings with a round robin of what were either, we call them pits and cherries, or highs and lows. Tell me the biggest high you had last week. What was the best thing that happened to you last week, whether it's personal, professional, or otherwise? And what was your biggest low? The purpose of this exercise is that we start every conversation with a really good understanding of just exactly where people are at. If my high is something that I'm super excited about, you're gonna know that. If I say, you know what, I don't really have a high this week, it was all fine, but I didn't have anything, but my low was a pretty big low, well, that's the team member you know you need to connect with a little bit more. So read the room, understand at the beginning of every individual meeting and also the beginning of every team meeting where people are at. It also allows team members, if you do it in team meetings, it allows team members to recognize, hey, you know what, Susie's having a rough week. So if Susie makes a mistake, maybe I'm not gonna come quite down as hard as on Susie as I normally would. Maybe I'm gonna be a little bit more empathetic, a little bit kinder in the way I say, hey, you know what, I think we made a mistake here, can we fix it? But if nobody understands what's going on emotionally with everybody, then how are we ever gonna make those adjustments? A couple of other fun ideas for theme days, especially if you're stay at home, you know, recipes of the day were great ideas. We're all cooking at home for so much. We're getting kind of sick of our own food options. So everybody send in your recipe and we'll publish them. We'll try new things. A gratitude day, get folks on a call and start talking about what are you most grateful for. Mindset is everything in terms of engagement. So if you can get people talking about what they're grateful for, you're going to engage their mind and you're going to get them thinking in a positive direction, which is going to get them more engaged in what's going on, both from a team perspective, but from a work perspective. Get folks to share pictures. The more you can share about what you did during all of this, again, many of us are used to getting up every Monday and going to the office. We start over a cup of coffee with a conversation about what did you do this weekend and how was your weekend and what was the fun thing that the kids did this weekend. Whatever it is, that's where we start our Monday mornings. And we don't necessarily have that anymore. So how do we find fun ways to make sure that you're spreading that theme across all of your folks? I am going to stop there and give everybody an opportunity to ask some questions on any of these particular topics. So feel free to write those questions in the chat, either